having debt is one thing, and it only becomes a real big problem, as I found, if you cannot pay for it afterwards. So it's not every day, like I said, that I find a lot of things that are interesting in Science magazine, but I was sent this actually, and the person who sent it to me thought, well, it's another woke hit piece against science and what have you. And from the title, somebody could perhaps assume that this is going to be woke. But I actually have to disagree with that assessment. This is not as woke of a piece as you think, but it is connected to a very real issue in terms of when do students go to college, should they go to college at all, and also the notion of how do you pay for it, or do you have financial literacy that needs to be involved. And as I've said many times, the next generation of scientists are trained at universities, so this is kind of matters, these kinds of things. So I figured this would be an interesting piece to go through and talk about a little bit, because I think the point made is actually not woke. It's not a postmodernist point at all. But it is a very good general point to be made here that I think the author makes very well, if only talking about it in a particular way. But I do think very well made point that should be brought up. So I'll add my own thoughts as always on top of it, but I encourage you to go read this, and I also want to know, because it is a hot debate right now, do we just outright forgive student loan debt? Which, for me and my own personal belief on that, the answer is no. This is a choice. You made the choice to go to college, and that includes the consequences that come with it. But and the consequence that comes with it is the student loan debt. That said, I have been a bigger fan of the idea of having universities co-sign the loans so that they have a financial stake involved in the success of the student. That way, that they should be able to get a job. There's other concerns that are there with that. That's a whole other issue. But let's get into this a bit. This is by Erica Moore. As I sat in the financial aid office, the seat was cold and the chill seeped into my body. I was about to sign away another $20,000 in student loans to continue my education at one of the best universities in the United States. I didn't want to sign. I had never seen $20,000 in my life, but I had already come so far. I was in my third year of college, and I didn't see any other choice. Looking back, though, I'd wish I'd thought more about the implications of my financial decisions. My debt nearly kept me from pursuing graduate school and becoming the scientist I am today. So, yeah, $20,000 is, for some schools, that's pennies now in terms of student loans. Or in terms of the cost of tuition and fees per year, that's pennies. I know I had that when I first started at my alma mater, was pretty close to what we were paying per year to go to school. And no, I also had very many student loans. The way it worked out for me was a little bit different, but I had very many student loans also here that I had to that were addressed. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to get too much into private life of my own there, but the that is a fair question. But one of the questions that's not asked here is, why the tuition is so high. Why the tuition is so high and keeps creeping higher. And I think there's actually a number of reasons for that. One of those big reasons being that, okay, you do have a heck of an administrative bloat that's going on, and you've got to pay for all of those salaries, and so the tuition does get raised higher. Though it should be noted that particularly if you're public universities, tuition is not merely paid for. Tuition is not the only thing that pays for all those things going on at universities. Some of it does come from taxpayer dollars. Also, some universities do get money allocated by the state budget of the respective states in which they are in. So that is an aspect to think about there. That one of those reasons why. The other thing here, of course, is the other issue with it is in peer review. When you do peer review, in grant proposals. When you do grant proposals, one of the things that happens is you do, as someone who submits a grant proposal, in your budget, there is a line that you have to include in the budget that is indirect cost rate. And the indirect cost rate basically is a chunk that the university takes out to pay for the administration of the grant, because what the university does as a service to the professor, part of the reason they take some of the money that the grant that the professor is awarded, they handle doing the financial administration, doing all the back-end paperwork and the administration of the grant and what have you, and making sure salaries are allocated right and appropriate laws are followed and all of those kinds of little things. They pay for facilities and maintenance off of those indirect costs for a lot of research grants. And it's particularly true if this is a primary like research one university. That's one of the things they do, is they will take the indirect costs out from that grant. So a good example is, let's say I get a $100,000 grant somewhere for 1 year. Part of that pays for salary. Part of that may pay for my salary. It may pay for another person's salary. It pays for salary and fringe benefits. It may pay for travel. It may pay for publications. But one of the biggest things that's taken out, more often than not, is the indirect cost rate. And that can be as small as 10% that a university takes out, or that an institution takes out. But it can be as high, I believe, in the case of Harvard, and I don't know for sure, so apologize if I misstate it. No offense to Harvard or anything like that. But it can be as high as 70 or 75% of the grant is taken by the university as an indirect cost. So that's one of the ways they end up paying the bills. It is not solely off of tuition dollars. Here, not to mention, whatever the fundraising university does, from alumni, from companies, from any number of different things. There's a lot that goes on there. So just bear that in mind as you're thinking about the fact that tuition has gotten larger quite significantly in the last 20 years. And it does make it more difficult for students from particularly lower socioeconomic backgrounds to try and get into college. The other thing that happens then, though, is you have government-backed college loans, which I do think are a problem for why tuition is there, and why I think universities should co-sign is, the government-backed loans that are involved there do lead to the standpoint of, okay, there's always going to be money. The government's always going to pay the loan, so we can just keep hiking tuition. There's no incentive for competition there, that you could lose the loan or what have you. So part of me wants to see the co-signing of loans, in part just to say, okay, if this student cannot get a job successfully or get into graduate school after undergraduate college, then the university would be on hook to pay for that loan, to repay the loan. That's why I would say it's like, that might be a really interesting way to approach it. I've heard a couple of different arguments, but there's a lot of things there that drive tuition to be higher. Administrative bloat being a big part of it, but also just in the sense that with a government-backed loan, you can get a lot of money from the government that way. Anyway, when I got accepted, I had 3 siblings already in college, and like many Black families, we didn't have inherited family wealth to dip into to finance our education. My parents had always made it clear that the cost of my schooling was my responsibility. So in general, I think that should be what it is regardless. And yes, you're going to have some very wealthy families that can pay for their students outright. Problem is, if those students don't have any fiscal understanding, financial responsibility themselves, they're going to get out of school and end up in trouble anyway. Regardless of whomever's paying the bill, if there's inherited wealth there. That said, there's a lot of students from low socioeconomic statuses across the board from all different races who just can't afford it because tuition has gotten so high. And that's a huge problem either way when you're talking about the accessibility of college for many students across the country who might be very brilliant and could go to college. Question, of course, is should they go to college? I'm also a big fan of the idea that maybe you shouldn't go to college until you're in your early 20s to actually get some life experience and get a job and perhaps find a company who would be willing to pay for your schooling, because some of those do exist. So there is that. So I applied for student loans. I had a scholarship that covered 2/3 of my tuition, but I needed money for the remainder, as well as for books, housing, and food. I hadn't thought through those costs before I started, and it was daunting when they started to add up. I worked at a student center and tried to live frugally, tracking my expenses and eating for free whenever possible. But by the end of my degree, the loans had snowballed. As graduation neared, I returned to the financial aid office and learned just how big the snowball had gotten. I owed $65,000. I had been preparing to apply to graduate school to study biomedical engineering, but after seeing how much I owed, I wondered whether that was even an option. So I'm going to give a lot of credit here, because one of the reasons I want to see students not go to college until like a few years after high school is because I want them to have some understanding of finances and money and what have you. And the fact that you're very cognizant of what your tuition was and things like that shows that this person was very cognizant of the tuition and the costs and seeing it snowball and what have you. That's actually better than most students that I have known. Most students don't even necessarily know what they're getting into. They're just like, they know they're going to college, and they may have gotten great scholarships, and they may not have. That's the other thing, but they're not prepared to see that when it comes in, and that's part of the problem. So I don't blame students, really. A lot of the time, I don't blame students who are like, yes, cancel my tuition, of being that, because they never got the financial literacy in school, be it public school or private school, or from their parents, to say, this is what's going to happen. You got to pay bills. You got to learn how to balance a budget. You got to do all this. You got to do that. So that's why I think in part having a couple of years out of education, being from high school into college, having a couple of years in there where you can work or find a job in something you're interested in, or explore your interests a little bit, because the other problem is you go to college not knowing what you really want to do with your life at that point. So, if you go to college, make sure you know what you want to do, but also make sure to get some sort of fiscal responsibility, an understanding of the fiscal issues that come along with going to college. It is a choice to go to college if you really want to go. And for a lot of careers like mine, yes, you do need to go to college to get the advanced education. Yes. For other careers, you don't need to. And that's the thing about students, is like, well, I would love to see not just the fiscal responsibility, but going in a little earlier in high school and what have you, to say, wait a second, you don't need to go to college to have a fulfilling life. Go to college, yes, you can go to college if that's something you want to do, that is something important to you, that is connected to something you think you'll be great at. But, you don't have to go to college to have a fulfilling life. You could go to a trade school and live a life that is just as fulfilling and satisfying and meaningful as somebody who goes to college. And that's something I don't think we push often enough. So this is a great article in that get into some of those kinds of discussions. So I'm thankful that the author put this together. It's a great article, actually, in here. So let's see. I could defer my student loan payments while in graduate school, but when I examined the details, I discovered my debt would continue to collect an interest rate of 6%, which is quite high, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not sure for sure. I'm going to adjust that. I'm not 100% sure for sure there. It's been a while. That meant if I didn't make any payments during a 5-year PhD program, I would owe $88,354 instead of $65,000. Was my graduate education worth adding more than $23,000 in interest to my student loans? Friends were signing job offers and making plans to pay off their loans, which made me wonder whether that was the path I should take. Weighing my options left me feeling overwhelmed. I didn't want to ignore my debt problem, but I also didn't want to put off attaining my PhD. I knew it would be challenging to make student loan payments while living off a graduate student stipend, but I applied for graduate school anyway and gave it a try. I earned $33,000 per year and supplemented that income by working as a dog walker, a house sitter, and a babysitter. I took a job in campus housing, which allowed me to live rent-free. I also continued to live frugally. And there's nothing wrong. That's a great thing, to be able to live frugally, to learn how to live frugally, is actually a very good thing. I had to do that myself. I know of many others who had to do that to get through school. You have to learn those lessons. It's sort of deferred gratification in a lot of ways, because you're putting yourself and you're doing your college thing first, and it's like that's one of the things my parents told me, is like, when you're in college, you manage your own budget and things like that and what have you, but your schooling also comes first. So you do what you got to do to make sure you can do your schoolwork and get done and make it through, and do well in school, not just make it through school. Hustling from the lab to a dog sitting gig and back was not an easy task. I had to manage my calendar carefully, but it was worth it. I was able to pay off all my student loans by the time I graduated. I also secured an offer for a faculty job before graduating, which was a relief because by now I had educated myself on finances. I knew it was important to start making retirement contributions as early as possible in life. And I wasn't sure I wanted to spend years as a postdoc, barely making more than what I earned as a PhD student. You had the wherewithal to do it. Good on you. Good on you. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm glad you were able to succeed and do that. Good on you. That is fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic. Looking back, I wish I'd had more training in financial literacy during high school and college. Had I been more aware, I might have taken a different path. For instance, I could have reduced the cost of my education by going to a lower-priced community college for the first 2 years, or I could have applied for scholarships more aggressively. Now that I'm a faculty member, I've made it a priority to pass what I've learned about finances on to students I teach and mentor. In particular, I worry in particular about those who are members of historically excluded groups because they are more likely to graduate with debt. Yeah, in a way, I'd agree with that because it's very difficult because of the increase of tuition for anybody from lower socioeconomic status to succeed in this. So I do agree with that it's going to be really, really challenging for them to not make it through without debt. That said, here, there's one thing I want to say, and this is why I'm glad this author is talking about being financially informed, talking about being financially literate in here, and I would love to see more education on that in high school for students, or make sure the parents sit down with their kids and work out, how do you do a budget and what kind of money, start with allowances, this is your budget for the month kind of thing. That's where I would love to see it. I'm glad she's talking about it because the thing is, graduating with debt is one thing, but it's more of a concern and a question of if you cannot get the job to make sure you can pay off your debt. Having debt is one thing, and it only becomes a real big problem, as I found, if you cannot pay for it afterwards. You can't get a job. You can't get another position as a student or any of those kinds of things. You don't necessarily have to have your debt paid off by graduate school or by the time you graduate. This is great that this professor did that in her career. I applaud that. But so long as you can be financially literate, that you're starting to pay off your debt somehow, even if that you finish paying it off after you graduate, then you can do it. The challenge with debt is it's a big problem when you don't have any way to pay it off and you take out more than you can pay off. And again, this is why we need to address the issues of why is cost of tuition so damn high to begin with, and getting tuition to go lower, not just figuring out, more student loans or paying off debt or paying off student debt or anything like that. No. We need to correct the issue with tuition to begin with, because that's the other reason I don't like the idea of paying off student loan debt, because that's not going to fix the longer term problem of why tuition keeps going up, because you're going to have more and more students who are going to be in college and paying more in tuition and having larger student loans because of it. So that's my thoughts on that. I tell them to apply for as many scholarships as possible, to pay attention to the details of each loan, and to keep track of their expenses. Seeing them pay off their loans and make decisions that are financially informed fills my heart with joy. I don't want them to have to question their career aspirations the way I did. I want them to pursue the path that's best for them, and with a clear understanding of how it will impact their finances. Congratulations. Brilliant. I do agree that this is a very good article, I think, actually, from Science. Again, some critiques from me. Assistant professor, University of Florida nonprofit More Wealth teaches financial literacy and awards scholarships to students in need. This is fantastic. I'm glad you, pardon the euphemism, put your money where your mouth is, if you will, because this is great that you're doing that, because I think students do need a lot more financial literacy, regardless of wherever they come from. In life, to make sure that they can go to college and do it successfully. Though I do think we also need to address the issues of why tuition is so large to begin with, amongst other things. And I tend to think that there's way too much administrative bloat in some universities, things that colleges are doing that maybe they shouldn't be doing. The Though I can understand the idea that being in debt and being concerned about the debt makes you think maybe I can't go to grad school. Maybe I need to pay this off first or what have you. And in a way, that's a that's a conversation that students need to be thinking about for themselves. And like I said, I would prefer that students don't go to college until they have some serious financial literacy and some experience outside of the education system in the world of having a job and working with people and learning some of the soft skills that you can get from having a job first. So there's those kinds of things too. Overall, I think this is a great article. And I agree with the sentiment and agree with the idea that students going into college, if they want to be good scientists, actually, come to think of it, having the financial literacy side of things and the logic and understanding of balancing budgets and financial literacy or what have you is actually a career skill that will help later too. Because, like I said, you gotta, as the professor, when you go for grant proposals, you're the one who's got to fill out all those budgets. So having some financial literacy early on in your life and doing some of that budgeting is a useful skill to have later on when you're the professor after you've done all your classes. Oh, I know how to write a budget and balance numbers and and help out all the HR staff, because there's a lot of HR staff and financial services staff at universities that help the professors do these things in the management of their loans. So those kinds of things need to happen too. So yeah, I think that's a good thing and the thoughts there. But like I said, I don't think overall that this is. Somebody sent this to me. Can you review this woke article? I'm like, well, no, that's actually not really woke. It makes a very, very good point that there needs to be more financial literacy given for college students when they're going into college. But I think also misses the point of, well, why is tuition so large to begin with, and what can we do to make tuition less so that students all across the spectrum have an easier time getting into college, and it is not simply something that the very wealthy can do very easily. So that's my thoughts on that. If you like the video, hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the videos, share the videos, subscribe to the channel, all that good, lovely jazz. Don't forget there's a promo code down there for my locals. You can use promo code Pioneer. You can join my locals and get 1 month free as a supporter in the locals community, where there's all sorts of things that are starting to happen now behind the scenes. And there's going to be more going behind the paywall soon for supporters only. So with that in mind, I hope you'll come over and join us on locals. But until next time, of course, I hope you all stay curious.